Ahoy! Headhunters!
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Headhunter Hideout Friday edition. We're coming live from multiple places here, but I have Lee Andrese with me, and she is the founder of akathame. I'm not even going to be able to say this. I know I'm not. Let's see here. I've got it written down. Akathame. Am I right?
You're close. Akathame.
Akathame. And we'll chat about what that means afterward. But I was on Lee's show. What was it? About six months ago.
Uh-huh.
And Lee has a lot of experience. She worked for Aquent, and she led their intelligence division team. She's been involved in, what is it, 2,000 placements, over 2,000 placements, trained thousands of recruiters. She's been a keynote speaker around the world, a keynote speaker at so many events. So we are super excited to have Lee here. And if I can say so, all of my interactions with Lee, one of the most amazing things about her is that she's just direct. She's very just a straight talker, just like what I appreciate, but also just super humble and just super willing to help out people that are doing great things. So Lee, welcome to the Headhunter Hideout. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joel. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
I know. I think the calendar gets booked up quick, so I think we probably planned this 6 or 7 weeks ago, right around that. Yeah, and so I'm trying to even think back. When did we do it? When did I come on your live show? Was it back in July, or when was that?
You were one of my very first, so I would say maybe even before that. Was it April, May, somewhere around there?
It must. I think it was right. It was right around when the pandemic started. So
yeah, I check, and so don't hold me to that. But yeah, it was early on in the game.
Yeah, that was a great conversation as well. And I know Lee, you do. How often do you go live yourself on LinkedIn?
I was doing it every single day for quite a while, and then I backed it down to like 3 days a week, and then I went to 2 days a week, and now I'm doing 1 day a week.
Okay.
Because you just have to learn what the right balance is, and what the right content and the messaging and all that is, and how you have to fit that into the rest of your business, especially if you're recruiting.
100%. So why don't you give us a little rundown? I always just love to kind of hear how people got into recruiting. You know, it's always I think the common theme is I just fell into it, but I always think like the just falling into it story is always interesting. So I'd love to kind of hear how you got into recruiting.
So the universe had a plan for me. So there's no mistaking this. So I knew most of my life that I had wanted to be a teacher. I mean, you know, as a kid, I was playing school, right? I would leave school and then I would go play school because I was the teacher. So I went to school and I got my degree in secondary education. And so while I was doing that, while I was going to school, getting my degree, I was temping in Eastman Kodak. So long story, very, very short. After we graduated, I had taught school for a little while, post-secondary and secondary education. But my college friend, Annette, was in between, or just starting out her career in teaching. We graduated the same year. And she was working summers for a staffing company called the Employment Store in upstate New York. And she said, just for giggles, why don't you go in and meet with the owner? Her name was Bev Slattery. And she was the most remarkable woman I think I had ever met at the ripe old age of 19 or 20.
Okay.
I mean, she was tall and just gorgeous. And she was the owner of this company. And she had worked for another company, staffing company, Victor Staffing in upstate New York for many, many years. But even before that, I was an executive secretary to the owner of a small insurance company called the Richport Company in Annapolis, Maryland. And we had lived, obviously, in Annapolis, Maryland, but we're from upstate New York, Rochester.
Yeah.
As my grandparents were aging, my parents wanted to move back to Rochester, New York. And I said, Dad, one of our board members is a former board member for Eastman Kodak. Why don't you give me your resume and I'll float it to Mr. Cox and see what he says. No sooner did I get that resume, my father's a PhD, microbiology and virology. No sooner did I get that resume into Ted Cox's hands, he sent it to the head of their research team, brought my father in for an interview, and offered him the job within 3 weeks.
Come on. That's awesome.
I was 15 and a half years old.
Wow. I hope they gave you a nice split on that one.
I got nothing. Well, that's not true. My parents did pay for my education. Of course, It wasn't all girls school, or it just converted, so that really wasn't a plus either. But that was my placement fee. They gave me the gift of a good education. And so when I started teaching, I became very frustrated in teaching. There's not a lot of creativity in teaching. There really isn't. There's so much. When I say there's not a lot, it means that you're constricted by curriculum, you're constricted by parents, you're constricted by administration, blah, 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 blah. Yep. So I was introduced to this woman, Bev Slattery, through my college friend, and we're friends today. She told me about the staffing industry, and I was saying, wait a minute, I placed my dad. This is what I did for my father, and you can get paid for that? And she said, I want you to come and work with me. My first job was $6.50 an hour as a professional in the staffing industry.
Wow.
$15,000 a year, and that was 1983.
So I'm curious. I just want to rewind a little bit. Okay, as far as like teaching goes, I mean, what was why teaching? Like, what was it about teaching that kind of drew you in?
I'm just a natural educator. I'm a natural trainer. I should have probably been an actor, but and teachers make very good salespeople because we educate, because we know how the human brain works, and we understand psychology, so we can get that level of interest. If you can sell a student, right? If you can sell a practice or a theory to a student and have them replicate it and master it, you should be able to do that when you sell. And that if you're a good salesperson, you're an exceptional trainer.
It's interesting too, because I think with teaching, it is almost like a form of entertainment as well, because you gotta, especially with kids, it's like you can't just get up there and be monotone and boring because they're gonna check out. You got to make it entertaining.
You've got to keep their attention.
Yeah, and it is very. I guess with sales, it is almost like you're teaching about your product or service, or teaching about why. Yeah, education, spot on. Well, and just wanted to say we got Momo here as well, and it's got hello all. It says LinkedIn user, but I'm on the live stream too, so I can see who it is. But yeah, okay. So you start off in the staffing world. It sounds like what was that atmosphere like? Was it like sink or swim, or did you feel like you got a really great like mentoring? Like, what was that like?
It was very different than it is today. Very different. You weren't just given a desk and a phone and said, here, good luck, God bless. They knew that I was very young, and so Bev took the time, and I sat with each and every member of the team to learn the ropes. And I always had somebody with me, making sure that I didn't fall too fast or start too slow, and so it was a great experience. I was mentored by the best and trained by the best, and eventually that paid off because I wound up heading up several divisions and several markets, and was a leader within a number of different staffing organizations for the past 21 years. It was Aquent though.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something there too, or you kind of touched upon it. That mentorship, I believe at the beginning, is something that's missing a lot in our industry, and particularly like the agency world. People don't take the time to really teach people. I mean, you'll have your initial training, but I think the companies that are really doing well, and some of them are smaller companies, some of them are larger, but you find that the companies that are taking that time to mentor or to bring people in a little bit slower than the companies that are just saying, sink or swim, here's the phone, make it happen. So how much do you think that played a role in you being successful? Because obviously you're highly successful. You've done a lot of, you've led big teams, you've led divisions, you've been in that strategic executive function. How much do you accredit that initial period being influential in kind of where you went? and kind of shaping how you bring other people in the industry as well.
So I think it's also fair to say that one of the reasons that I followed the staffing piece of it is I said I needed to pick a swim lane because whatever I was going to learn, I was going to master and then teach. And so that was my whole goal, is to becoming successful in the staffing industry so that I could later teach that, right? And so, because I can't, you've got to have credibility to train, right? If you're training people in a profession, you've got to have credibility. I apologize. My neighbor's dog is just
you're all good.
Going nuts. So I actually, for 10 years, was the first corporate trainer at Aquent, and then later became the director of that division. And the thing is that new hire training will either sink or swim the individual, and sink or swim the manager, and sink or swim the company. If we don't invest in the people that we hire, then what we've done is we said we are willing to roll the dice on the results.
100%.
So if you want consistency, and you want quality, and you want a viable business, you will invest in training. If you don't, then all you're saying is that we're willing to put up, $12,000 for 3 months. If you don't make it in 90 days, get out. To me, that's not a successful business strategy, but for many staffing companies, it is.
It's really, really well said. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, particularly with Aquent, obviously that's, you spent a lot of time there and were obviously instrumental in kind of how they onboarded and trained people. What do you see as like how fundamentally, what do you see, or what did you do that's just different to what other people are doing? Like, is it bringing people in and just in one function of the business, like, hey, you're a coordinator or you're a salesperson, or is it teaching people right from the get-go how to handle the whole equation? Like, fundamentally, what was your view on how to train people up and how to help them out?
Yeah, so I would say one of the things that we did, the reason that I have thousands of thank you cards in a file that I save, is because of whether it is a 72-hour immersive training on Aquent's procedures and practices for the expert staffing person. Even the expert staffing person was brought in, and I sat with them for 3 days, personally sat with them for 3 days, especially at the management level, right?
Yeah.
And so you onboard them. Then they would come to a 2-week boot camp, 1 or 2 week boot camp. And over a period of time, that boot camp became a remote boot camp, and then it would shorten. So we would have all these kinds of flexing going on with that boot camp. But I will tell you that the key to a new hire success and an organization success of onboarding new talent is the ability of the manager to train and coach, to show these people what to do, how to do it, what those best practices are, and then go with them and implement everything that new hire has learned. What a learning division does is provide that foundation. That they either can do one of two things. They either provide the introduction to those best practices, technologies, and processes, or they become a finishing school, allowing the manager to ramp them up for the first 90 days, make sure that they're a good fit for the organization, and then you can bring them to a boot camp that has that polish, right? That gives you all the nuances and breeds that culture that your organization so desperately needs if it wants to grow its brand locally, internationally, or wherever.
Yeah, it's massive. What point, and I don't know whether you'd be able to answer this, but was there a certain point that you got to where, let's say, if someone isn't catching on to recruiting, or then they're not catching on, like how did you work that into that system? Or like, at what point do you think you realize someone might not be successful, or do you believe that pretty much anybody could get trained in recruiting? Like, what's that tipping point, do you think, as far as time goes?
There is a very clear line to define a recruiter. So there's either good recruiters or bad recruiters. I don't think the mediocre recruiters are really shouldn't belong in that profession. They do it for all the wrong motives. They're not really very helpful to the talent. They're not very helpful for the clients. They might be able to moderate their billing to say that they're billing enough, but they're really order takers and order fillers. So where I draw the line is in the first 90 days, if I don't see curiosity, if they're not curious, if they're not learning about the talent, about the industry that they support, or about the positions that they're filling, the details on those positions and the impact that those positions and people will make on that organization, they're not going to make it long term. They might, let me qualify that. They might make it long term in a big box staffing company because they are very rote. Right? So when you go to the Ronstadts of the world, there's a point system and you have to learn and do so much to maintain that. So pretty much, anybody to varying degrees will be successful in that because you're being told what to do. But at a company like Aquent, when you are dealing with positions that have significant impact on an organization and a hiring manager, you've got to be able to think differently. This is not, and believe me, trust me, I worked at Kelly Services for a number of years, and I can tell you that light industrial, it is a no-brainer. Can you stand up all day long? Can you fling fish? you know, I mean, completely different. So there are people who can do that and be very successful at it. That don't really want to have, critical thinking capabilities, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but you're more reactionary in something like that. When you start getting higher placements, higher caliber requirement, when I say higher placements, I mean the stakes are greater. If somebody doesn't show up on a production line, it could throw off that production line, right? Yep. But you're not trying to find somebody with a laundry list of capabilities. You just need somebody who has the physical stamina to move product A to point B.
Yep.
So, and there's nothing wrong with that. Trust me, that's how I cut my teeth. And but the conversations you're having with the candidates are different too.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of that at the end of the day is just trying to find people who are going to be reliable and show up. And
number one,
I've seen the truck driving around even here locally where invest in a vehicle and sometimes you got to pick people up and you got to drop them off. And I think staffing the recruiting is obviously they're kind of different animals within themselves. But that curiosity piece I think is huge. And I know how do you do you think that's possible to vet out in an interview? Because absolutely. So how are you vetting that out? Like let's say you got someone that's brand new, they're entry level. What are the types of things that you look for in that interview or even in their past experience? Like what are the indicators to you that someone is going to be curious before that 90 days that you're mentioning?
I am a big fan of Lou Adler, and I'm sure you're familiar with him, or are you? Yeah. So Lou, I have used this question for decades now. And I ask the candidate, the recruiter, tell me about your most significant accomplishment in the past year. And so I learned from that through drill down questions. I learned what they learned, how they learned it, why they had to learn it, how deep they went into the solution, how deep they went into problem solving, how deep they went into collaboration and being resourceful. So that one question offers so many possibilities to uncover how somebody works successfully, how they work with their manager, how they work across an organization, how they learn, why they learn, right? And how quickly they can adapt and learn. So there's your fit.
No, I love it. And the only reason I ask is I just think it's super ironic that, one of the biggest things that I see in the recruiting industry is obviously we're recruiting talent for other companies, but and also saying like, hey, we're going to find you talent that's going to be that's going to stay with you as well. So retention obviously is kind of backed by that, and you have guarantees. I've seen people with a year-long guarantee, whatever, you get that point. But when you actually look at most recruitment agencies, they got terrible turnover, they got bad retention, don't know how to keep people. A lot of times the cultures are pretty poor as well, or I think it's just there's more of that mentality of everybody for themselves, and it can get like that. So obviously Aquent is a really big company, and I've talked to a lot of people that have worked there and spent time there as well, and they've got a great culture, and they're a big company as well. So how did you kind of coach people into, especially managers, like how do you coach a manager to invest in somebody if they're not necessarily getting something from it, or were you incentivizing them and saying, hey, you get, if they're successful, how did you work that? Because I think that would be great to understand.
I never had that issue. And I'm going to tell you why. Because when I work with managers and helping them staff or hire or train on board new people, the first question I say is, what does this person mean to you? And eventually the hiring managers I never had to ask that question again. I said, what does hiring this person mean to you? It's their own business case for hiring that person that gets them to invest the time. So when you hire somebody in a recruiting position, they're responsible for growing revenue. They're responsible for extending your brand. They're responsible for customer interaction, customer service, customer experience. If you want all of those things to be positive, and they're also responsible for profitability, because if they lowball on the pay, or if they make the pay rate too high and the bill rate too low, they've lost. If they make the pay rate too low and the bill rate too low, they've lost. The company's lost. So all of those things need to be taught as to what the company's expectations are. So a hiring manager must treat the people that report to them as gold. They are money in the bank for that hiring manager. The hiring manager will make or break their initiatives and goals with those people that they've hired. There's pretty good incentive to make sure that we invest the time and the resources to make sure that person's successful, don't you think?
100%. And I think, but I think it's, it's like you said, it's getting that buy-in from the manager and them seeing the business case for it. And but I think that
starts at the top.
100%.
That's the CEO. If the CEO doesn't say you've got to take time to invest. So again, let's go back to Aquent. Aquent was so concerned about hiring the best of the best that they offer $8,000 every year for every person to keep up their professional development, whether it's in their field of practice, whether it's in recruiting, sales, management, doesn't make a difference.
I love that.
$8,000 a year that organization invests in continual learning for those people. It's mandatory for this company to have smart people. Mandatory.
It's massive. I mean, I think that's massive for any organization, and I think that's directly investing in your people. And I haven't heard of a lot of companies doing that just in general. I mean, I've heard of the, hey, we'll reimburse you for your education, which I guess is in line with that, but I think really encouraging people in that, because then, because I think that's a point that most people reach in their career where they just get to, hey, I'm not growing. And as soon as somebody gets to that not growing point, that's when they get unengaged. They become stagnant. They start, maybe bringing that toxicity in. So I think you have to be, if your people aren't growing within the organization, you have to be helping them just grow personally. And so that's massive. I really I didn't know that either, but it makes sense.
As a manager, I hold the team accountable for spending that money. If they don't spend that money, there better be a really good reason why. Because I don't want anybody on that team or anybody working with me that isn't a learner. Now, remember, that's the teacher in me, right? So I'm a learner. I am born curious. I love to learn, and whatever I learn, I give away, I teach. It's like giving it back, because when you give it back, you get it back tenfold.
Yeah.
And so if
I love that.
After me learns, imagine how much more helpful they'll be to the talent that they represent and the clients that they support. Come on.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit now, kind of what you're doing individually too. And I know we were chatting offline a little bit just about some of the massive issues in terms of kind of how companies are handling recruiting right now. So tell me a little bit about like post Aquent life and kind of how things have been and what you're doing right now, and obviously how the pandemic. Because I think was it right around the pandemic that you kind of started?
So I took a year off to try to, work things through. So by the beginning of this year, I had 3 contracts already lined up, Joel. And I was one of those people that went to New York City in February, the end of February, and March, I became very, very sick. So they said I didn't have COVID, but they believe now it was a false negative test. So given that it took me about a month or so to get past everything, and thank goodness there's no after effects. So all of those opportunities came to a screeching halt. And so I decided to say, let's figure out what this next step, where is the need? Where is the actual need in the human capital domain? And of course, I go right back to my grassroots of what's going on with staffing. How is recruiting really working? And I will tell you the long and short of it, it was making me very sad. Over that year, I also did some research, my own quiet little research, and I found out that the majority of people had absolutely no need for recruiters. It was a horrible. They felt as though most recruiters didn't care about them. They felt that the talent were nothing more than matters of resumes. The recruiters didn't even look at the resume, right, of the candidate and offering them positions that they shouldn't even have been offered or considered. And then hiring managers gave the same feedback, that it's very rare that a recruiter would talk to them about their business. All they wanted to know was what was open with that seat. That's it.
So as far as like the hiring manager third party relationship, or is that even with hiring managers and their own internal recruiting?
Internal as well as third party. It was slightly better for the internal side because they had FaceTime. If you've got a good solid recruiter in-house, that recruiter will make it mandatory that if you want to work with me, this is how this is going to work. And if you've got a strong in-house talent acquisition leader, that talent acquisition leader will make that process known throughout the organization and follow it up with facts. Why is the process this way? Because this is how we know it works.
Yeah. So obviously, I know we talked again, you're a big believer in partnership and actually partnering with companies as opposed to just kind of getting on. Obviously, you did contingent for a long time as well, but more trying to actually get those genuine partnerships with people. And I agree with you. I think it's something which is missing. I think over the last 10 years, it seems like a lot of the talent acquisition teams in-house have grown bigger and bigger. But obviously the process is we're still hearing the same things. We're hearing from hiring managers, we can't find the right talent. We can't find the right people out there. And then you're hearing from job seekers, we're not hearing back from people. And so clearly there's still a ton wrong. What do you think is like, obviously there's a lot of issues, but what would you say one of the major issues is that you see with that kind of discrepancy between job seekers, hiring managers, the TA team, if it's internal? What do you think is the biggest issue in that whole kind of group working together?
Yeah. So all of those things that you mentioned are symptoms. So the lack of communication, the frustration by the hiring manager of not getting the talent that they want and the time frame that they want, the frustration by the recruiter of not hearing back from the hiring manager, being dissed by the talent being dissed by the recruiter, blah, 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 blah. All of those are symptoms.
Yeah.
The problem, I think, is systemic within the recruiting profession. And the only people to blame are the recruiters. And those who lead the recruitment practice, right? Across the board. We've either got to put a stake in the ground that says, if you want to work professionally with a recruiter, this is what that process, these are the expectations that you should be ready to accept. And when I say accept, it doesn't mean that we are not going to be flexible. It doesn't mean that we're not going to accommodate, right? But as a recruiter, I have actually taken that word out of my vocabulary. Here, I just don't use that anymore. I am first and foremost would consider myself a talent agent or a talent acquisition leader, really and truly. So if we were to tell our clients, if you really want the best candidate and the best employee, in the quickest time frame that's not going to break the bank, then these are the ground rules. This is how we're going to work. This is how it's going to work. So if you were to think like an accountant or think like an attorney, they have very specific processes, very specific expectations. And you just have to work within those rules and regulations. Why aren't we doing that on the recruiting side? Why aren't we saying, I am no longer going to be working for you for free against 5 other competitors to try to fill this one job? Why are we doing that?
Well, I just want to highlight, Cameron just said, definitely some systematic issues at hand. We have to take responsibility for how we control the process and the care that we give to each candidate and client. And
Cameron, that's right.
I think it comes down to people have been doing things the same way for a long time. And I think there's interesting, obviously technology is advanced. And technology is an interesting one as well, because obviously technology can make things easier, but a lot of times it can bring complications as well. But I think we make it competitive in ourselves because as an industry, it seems like what most people care about is, making as much money as possible. And I think as long as that money is higher than partnership, then everybody's going to keep playing by those rules. And when you've got big billion-dollar, trillion-dollar, people who are making money of the problems that are in the system, then it's like there's not a massive incentive. So I think it's showing people a different way. I think, and re-educating people on there can be different options, and then more, and then kind of getting that message out there through means of like social media and these different avenues that we have. But I think it's, to your point, it's collectively, and it takes people, whether it's individually and then collectively, but it takes people putting that stand in the ground saying, look, we've had enough with this. There's got to be a better way. To me, exclusivity it should be a no-brainer. I think more people are realizing that I think there's people who are, kind of starting firms with more of that exclusivity and less on the profit and more on partnership, and saying, hey, we'll lose a little bit in the profit up front if we can get more of that partnership relationship. But then I think in-house too, it's going, quick isn't always the right way. It's quality matters a lot too. And simple fact is quality takes a little bit more time. So we have to allow more time to bring people in the right way. What are your thoughts on that?
I say that one of the reasons that I left the administrative and light industrial staffing division, I walked away. I said, there's got to be a better way to live. There's just got to be, because I was working 24/7, 365. Yeah. It wasn't mind difficult. It was physically difficult, right? And emotionally difficult. And that is when I realized that, and I will never forget this call. It was from Tom Anton. He was the EVP, Executive Vice President at Kelly Services. And I went into the Allentown market and we hit 4 all-time highs. I did it in Allentown and Erie, but in Erie, we 4 all-time highs in 14 months in our FTE. We did it by hours, number of hours. And Tom calls me and he says, Lee, how did you do that? I said, it's really easy, Tom. You just need to focus and do the right things for the right people at the right time. Pretty much is what it boiled down to. You just need to focus and do the right things. And it all boiled down to, are we doing the right things and am I giving it away? This was at a time when a mandate from Kelly came down the pike that said, I want you to get any contract you can, even at cost.
Wow.
Even at cost. And I said, I'm not working for free. I'm not for free. And that's when I drew the line in the sand. And at that time, that is when I realized that everything about what I was doing was transactional. It did not take a brain to do what I did. I just needed to be nice. I needed to know enough to know that when people are in pain, I could help them solve that pain by finding them a job or filling a job. That's all I needed. I wanted more. I knew that there had to be more. Now, in that environment, I worked with exceptional leaders, and they taught me all about the business. That's where I learned about P&Ls and all that kind of stuff. So you can learn something, right, in those big box scenarios. That is when I got into the marketing, communications, and creative staffing. Back then, when I first joined Aquent in 1999, back then it was very niched. It was not transactional. It was not, you had to be smart. You had to use every part of your being to make sure that you were doing the right thing at the company and individual level, right? For your client and Aquent and the talent, right? So that there was no small feat there. As unfortunate, as wonderful as that experience was over the past few years, that part of the organization, of an enterprise, which is the marketing creative, has become very transactional as well.
Do you think that's more size of organization or technology or just kind of, you think that kind of just
people are doing it, more people are providing the marketing, communications, creative staffing capability and recruiting capabilities. And so now what the recruiting industry has done, as it always has, as most companies do, they start competing on price. So now people are lowering their prices, doing more, lowering their prices, doing more, lowering their prices, doing less. Right? And so now, it's gotten to the point where we have these staffing solutions and recruiting solutions that, they're global solutions, they are outsourced solutions, and they're reducing the rates to gain speed and volume. Where's the quality? And
it goes out of the window.
I'm not saying that those models don't work, because clearly it works. They do work in certain environments and in certain situations. Those high volume, high activities, they do work. But does that work for you as a recruiter? Yeah. Does that work for you as a talent acquisition leader? Does that work for your organization in trying to meet its bigger picture objectives, either in the near term or long term? And if that high, fast-paced solution works for you, then use it. Then absolutely use it. But if not, and look at that long term. So you talked about turnover. What is your turnover? Right? That's a system. That's a problem. Right? That's not even a problem. That's a symptom. If your turnover is high, if your cost per hire is high, if you are getting turnover in your recruiting team, right? All these things are symptoms. So it really takes somebody who understands the data and the impact of recruiting within an organization to identify those problems and then go in and fix them. And that's what akathame does. So akathame is focusing on making sure that the talent acquisition process is so fine-tuned that you're getting your best value. Not lowest price technically acceptable solution, your best value.
Yeah.
For the outcome you want. Now, having said that, I'm taking that one step further. We are not going to be doing contingent staffing.
Yeah.
There isn't going to be one direct or executive hire decision or contract that we sign that doesn't have a retainer fee to it. Because I'm also tired of telling recruiters you have to work for free until you fill that job. Meanwhile, that recruiter, Joel, is going out there sharing the brand, company name, exposing that company to new contacts and new clients or candidates. You are spending hours and hours on end trying to reach out to these people at night, on the weekends, when they're not working, blah, 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 blah. No, Joel, you are no longer going to be working for free if you work with akathame as a recruiter.
Well, I think, that's the big issue though, is
it is
because I mean, even from like a brand perspective, because I worked for a company that was sort of it was like an hourly retain model that they had, and definitely the price point was a big selling point for a while. But I think that they've shifted that now to much more of a focus on the quality piece, but more of like, okay, we're high value, which can sometimes mean that you get more for less, but not always. And what I found was like I'd start working with companies and we were exclusive with them because they were paying us an hourly rate, so we were getting paid for our time.
There you go.
But then we'd meet with them and say, yeah, we're also working with 5 other contingent agencies, and I was like, well, how effective is that going to be if then each one of those recruiters is also working with 5 different companies, and
You know
then
why?
they'd be like, well, we negotiated the rate lower, and it's
You know why they're doing that?
probably desperation, just it's easy and quick results.
It's called fear.
Fear, yeah, that's for sure.
Fear of not getting what you want when you want it,
Yeah.
or fear of missing out on something, or fear of losing something. So when a client tells me, Lee, you're going to be one of 5 providers, that's terrific. Tell me how you work with those other 5 providers, and then I'll let you know if I want to jump on that bandwagon. And if not, then we'll make that decision when we cross that bridge.
Well, and then that's it. And it was like, and then spending some time in the contingent world, it was like the best recruiters that I saw were the ones that they just had long-standing relationships. And so it's always going to be a relationship game, because if you want to be a really good internal recruiter, it takes a long time to know that company and know what the culture is and know what the selling points are. Same with contingent. If you've worked with a company for 10 years, you're automatically going to be a better recruiter than an in-house recruiter that's been working there for 3 months, because you have to know. And I think that's the shame of it. It's kind of where I had to struggle with sort of that kind of that MPC style of, hey, I got a great candidate, and then pitching them to a company and saying, yeah, they're going to be a great fit for you, because it's at the end of the day, it's like, how do you actually even know that if you don't know anything about a company? And it's like technical fit is a part, obviously. I mean, I definitely don't believe that technical fit is nothing. It's a big part of it. You got to have the experience. You got to know what you're doing. But culture, attitude, EQ, those intangibles are just as important, if not more important, for someone to stay with an organization. So, and the only way you can get to know that is through, like you're saying, the relationship and getting to know the client. And I think from a brand point of view, if you're a company and you've got 5 different people telling different stories, it's not helping you. If you've got then 5 contingent recruiters, and then you've got a lower rate negotiated, that's not helping. And so I think your approach is the best. I think it takes longer to get in there, but when you do get in there and people trust you and they trust your process, then it's just going to work. It works better for everybody.
So our model, which we just recently launched, is very groundbreaking. Akathame is only going to take on so many clients.
Smart.
And we're only going to take on so many clients within each industry. So if I work with an AI company, I will only work with 2 other AI companies. That's it. So that the talent that we represent become the focal point. So if you come to me, Joel, and you're a data scientist, say, for example, then I will say, okay, these are the companies that I represent, that I have vetted. I very carefully vet the candidate as well as the company. So these are the 3 companies that I work with in this domain. This is what you have available. Would you like me to pitch you to the C-suite? Would you like me to pitch you to the head of that department? Would you like me to pitch you blah, 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 blah. So if I don't have those relationships inside those companies, and if I don't have the trust of that talent, neither one of them should allow me to represent either side. And in my mind, the talent's happiness comes first. If the talent is happy doing what they're doing, that means that they're capable of doing it, that they're willing to do it, and that they enjoy the environment that they're working in. The hiring manager is going to be thrilled. If the hiring manager is going to be thrilled, the company is going to be thrilled. Their boss is going to be thrilled. So it really starts with a recruiter understanding the impact that they have on the economy, on that person's life, on 2 people's lives, and a company. Yeah. When the recruiter understands their impact and their value, they will change how they do business. They will elevate their level of responsibility, their level of importance, and their integrity in that process of making sure that the right people are getting connected to achieve common ground and outcomes and business goals. Once that is sacrificed, when you start sacrificing any part of that for rate, something is going to be missing. You're sacrificing quality. The recruiter has to know their value, and they have to be able to stand up for themselves and articulate that value. If they do not, please have them call me. I will make sure they know what their value is.
Love that. Well, I think everything you're saying makes a ton of sense. And I think that especially vetting the client, that's something that not enough people do. And I think it's how you get yourself in trouble really quickly. And it's how new recruiters get themselves in trouble really quickly, because usually you find that company that you cold call a company and they want to work with you should be asking some questions, because, to get a good relationship, it takes time. So, well, I know we've been live for about 45 minutes, so I'd love to kind of just wrap up here with a few things. The first thing is, what's kind of your plan here for, like, obviously 2021's rapidly approaching. Like, what would you like to see for 2021? And then we'll just close off with like your number one or your biggest tip for somebody that's just starting out, either as a recruiter and then transition into as like a business owner within the recruitment field as well. So why don't we start with the 2021 plan and kind of what you'd love to see for this next year and this time we're coming into.
For my business, or for the practice as a whole?
I'd say for your business.
For my business. So we do have financial goals, and I don't want to release those, but we do have those goals. But our goal as a company is to work with a set amount of clients and to keep that client list very small. Our goal is to also work with a set amount of talent coming out of school and through their retirement, meaning that we help them manage their careers from start to finish. So we're building that capability as well. Where I see the biggest opportunities, obviously, in healthcare and technology are probably the two biggest areas that we are looking at. And I would also say federal. So federal, I think, is going to grow. Anybody who supports the federal government is going to grow. We have a practice at akathame that is focusing on nothing but cleared requirements, because I still have a secret clearance within the intelligence community. So I'm going to be focusing on supporting those missions, which is huge, right? So I'm building a team to help do that, while my business partner is building out other teams and capabilities within other industries. For new people, that was your question. What would I say?
Yeah, like if someone, okay, so like someone just started in recruiting during a pandemic or right before the pandemic, obviously super tough time. Like, what advice would you give someone? And, maybe someone that's just feeling like, is this for me? Or like, I don't know, like I'm kind of treading water here. What's your advice for someone like that?
Recruiting is not a calling. Unlike me, who placed her first person. When I was 15 years old, I placed my dad. He was my first placement. And, but teaching was my calling. So wedding the two worked out really well for me. I knew that I always wanted to be a trainer at some point, a corporate trainer, but I also knew that I wanted the integrity of being an expert in that space before I went and taught it, which happened for me. And I was very fortunate to have the career that I have. But what I would advise recruiters, make sure that you understand the process from the user's side. So if you're a recruiter in an organization, if you were looking for a job, would you come to the organization that you're working at to be represented?
Yeah.
Do they show you the care that you need as a candidate? Do they show the client the respect and the curiosity that they need to learn the business enough to represent them, right? So never forget where you came from. At one point, we're all going to become unemployed. Doesn't make any difference what the reason is. At one point, you will be in a spot where you will be looking for something new.
Yeah.
If you never lose sight of what it feels like to look for work, you will have automatic respect from the talent, because you will treat them as such. You will respond to them. You will get back to them. You won't leave them hanging. You won't ghost them.
Massive.
You'll set wonderful expectations, and you do the same thing for the client. If you are unhappy as a recruiter, I would ask you to first look internally. What is it about the processes that you are being taught that don't sit well with you? What are the expectations that don't sit well with you? And then start shopping around for companies or staffing firms that give you more of what you're looking for. And that might not be a staffing company. It might be a boutique firm. It might be a big executive recruitment staffing firm, right? A big executive recruiting space. It could be in-house recruiting. But I would say question those things before you walk away.
That's awesome advice. And Lee, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Primarily LinkedIn, or do you have other resources out there?
All my contact is updated and LinkedIn. My phone number, my email address, and you can connect with me, you can follow me, whatever. And that's another thing, recruiters. If a recruiter doesn't have all of their contact information current in LinkedIn and easily accessible to candidates and clients, I won't even hire them. I won't even consider them as a candidate. Why? Because they've cut themselves off.
Yeah, no, it's massive. And well, Lee, I really appreciate your time. I'm glad we were able to get you on. And I want to kind of just repeat what I said at the beginning with just, you're super humble. You're really willing to help people, which I think is massive. And anybody, because I've talked to, like I said, quite a few people within the organization that are there now that parted ways as well. And everybody just speaks massively highly of you and just who you are, and you you walk it, so it's I think when you mentioned that those thank you letters, there's a reason for that, and so I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that about you, and I highly just recommend anyone who's out there, who's particularly if you're just starting, if you're seasoned, whatever level you're at, definitely connect with Lee on LinkedIn and follow her content. And I'm looking forward to hearing how 2021 does go. And I'm sure whatever happens, I know you're going to be doing amazing things. So we'll wrap it up here, guys. And I know on Monday we've got another show on noon, and we'll see you guys then. And so thanks again, Lee. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. And to all of those who are tuning in now and after, appreciate it.
And look at this. Monica says, "Wait, you guys know each other? This is rad." I just connected with Monica, so I'm sure she knows you guys know each other too, which is awesome.
Yeah. We know each other very, very well.
Yeah, I love that though. This is rad. All right, well, we're gonna end this show. Appreciate everybody who's out there. Cameron, Monica, Momo, Imola also said hi, hello as well. So we'll just throw that up there. Great to see you out there, and we'll see you guys on Monday.
Take care. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Yep, I'm gonna end this, and then Lee, you just stay behind here for a second.